Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep into trans health in America after the 2024 election.
Oh, yeah. It's certainly a hot topic right now.
It is, and our main source is this Salon.com article.
Hmm.
Came out just a few days after we got the election results.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it really gets into like those immediate reactions and anxieties from the trans community and even their healthcare providers.
I can imagine.
It feels like this election has just stirred up a lot of anxiety, but also some hope.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're going to kind of break it all down today.
Okay.
One of the things that really jumped out at me in this article was the statistic about the Trevor Project Crisis Hotline.
Oh, yeah.
They saw a 700% increase in calls and texts just the day after the election compared to like 2 weeks before.
Wow. That's pretty significant. Speaks volumes, doesn't it?
It's huge. And it really shows you just how much uncertainty and fear is out there in the trans community right now.
Absolutely. I mean, that statistic is definitely alarming. It really highlights how vulnerable a lot of trans people are feeling right now. And, even before the election, access to gender-affirming care was already a really big issue,
Oh, for sure.
especially in those states that have, enacted all these bans.
Right. Like in the article, it mentions Texas and how
Mhm.
people are literally going to other states like New Mexico just to try and get the care they need.
Right.
But then those clinics are getting overwhelmed. The wait lists are just getting longer and longer.
Yeah, it's a tough situation for sure. It puts such a strain on resources and creates these barriers for people who desperately need this care.
Yeah.
And when you think about the political climate, especially, the previous Trump administration and some of their anti-LGBTQ plus policies, it's easy to see why there's so much anxiety right now.
Okay, so let's take a step back for a second for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with all this.
Yeah.
When we talk about gender-affirming care, what exactly are we talking about?
Well, it's actually a pretty broad spectrum of care. It's really tailored to each person's individual needs.
Okay.
So that can be things like social transitioning, like changing your name or pronouns, how you present yourself. It could also include things like puberty blockers for younger people, hormone therapy, and in some cases, surgical procedures. But the important thing is that it's really individualized care and it's all evidence-based.
And from what I understand from the article, they really emphasize that this isn't about like forcing anyone down any specific path, right? It's
Ah.
about making sure people have the support and the resources to really align how they feel inside with how they present themselves to the world.
Exactly. It's about empowering people to be who they truly are and to make these informed decisions about their own bodies and their own health care. And the research is really clear on this. Gender-affirming care can be life-saving. It reduces dysphoria, it helps people's mental health and well-being, and it lowers the risk of suicide.
That's powerful. And yet there's still so much misinformation and fear-mongering going on, especially now after this election.
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, there's this narrative out there that gender-affirming care is somehow harmful or experimental, when in reality it's been the standard of care supported by like all the major medical associations for decades.
The article mentions a doctor in New Mexico, Dr. Molly McLean, who actually specializes in gender-affirming care. And she describes the situation after the election as people are devastated and terrified about what this might mean for their access to medications. This is evidence-based and life-saving care.
Wow. You can definitely hear the urgency in her voice. For a lot of trans people, this care isn't a luxury, it's truly a necessity. And the idea of losing access to that, having your health care become this political football, that's gotta be terrifying.
It's really unsettling to think about. The thing that really struck me when reading this was the sense of urgency, this fear that's pushing people to make decisions about their transitions much faster than they might have otherwise.
Right.
Like the article talks about people just scrambling to schedule appointments, worried that that opportunity is going to close on them.
Yeah, it's truly heartbreaking that people are being forced into these impossible situations, having to make these huge life-altering decisions under all this pressure just because of what politicians are doing.
Yeah.
And, the reality is, in at least 26 states, access to gender-affirming care for young people is already restricted or totally banned.
And in Texas, their attorney general is suing doctors who even provide this care.
I know, it's unbelievable.
Just creating this climate of fear, not just for patients, but for the healthcare providers too.
Absolutely. Imagine you're a doctor and you've dedicated your life to helping people, only to be targeted and threatened just for providing care that is backed by evidence. It's chilling. And this fear, this feeling of being under attack, it impacts every part of life for so many trans people and their families.
And now there's this possibility that those restrictions are just going to get even worse, especially with the outcome of the election.
Yeah. That's a real concern. And we've got this new Supreme Court case, United States v. Scrimeti, coming up. This case is a big deal because it could set a precedent for the entire country. Depending on how the court rules, it could either protect access to gender-affirming care or open the door for even more restrictions.
So a lot hinges on this one case. We've been talking a lot about the political landscape, but I think it's important to remember this isn't just about some abstract legal battle. This is about real people's lives. So what are you hearing from the trans community right now? How are they coping with all of this?
Yeah, resilience is a powerful thing. And despite all the fear and uncertainty, the trans community has shown incredible resilience. They're organizing, advocating, and supporting each other in amazing ways. There's this great quote from Joan Irwin. She's the CEO of Trans Health. She said, "We've had to just kind of walk through the fire and come out better on the other side."
That's really inspiring. It really speaks to their strength. And speaking of strength, I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the positive transformations that Dr. McLean has witnessed in her patients. The article shares some really touching stories.
Oh, yeah, let's definitely get into that. Because amidst all the fear and uncertainty, it's important to remember that gender-affirming care is about helping people thrive. She talks about how her patients, especially the younger ones, just light up when they come in for their appointments. They're so excited, sharing their experiences with friends, finally feeling like themselves. She even had parents saying, "I got my kid back."
Wow.
It's powerful stuff.
That must be such a relief to finally feel comfortable in your own skin like that. And it's not just these, heartwarming stories, right? The research backs this up. Gender-affirming care really is linked to better mental health.
Absolutely. Lower rates of depression and suicide, increased well-being overall. But, of course, there are still those voices out there trying to dismiss this evidence, painting this picture of, confused kids being rushed into these life-altering decisions.
Right, like they don't know what they're doing.
Exactly. But the article does a good job of addressing that misconception, doesn't it?
Yeah, it lays it all out. It's not this quick decision.
No.
It's a process. It can take years.
Right. Lots of counseling, parental involvement, and medical expertise every step of the way.
So it's really important for anyone listening. If you hear those narratives out there trying to scare people, take it all with a grain of salt.
Oh, absolutely.
This isn't about forcing an agenda on anyone. It's about supporting people on their own individual journeys.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Honestly, it's kind of ridiculous that we even have to debunk this stuff.
It is.
Imagine if we treated other medical treatments like this.
Oh my God.
Like chemotherapy or insulin, debating and restricting access based on political opinions rather than scientific facts.
Right. Like, you can't have this life-saving treatment because...
It's absurd.
Okay, so let's get into the Supreme Court case. United States versus Scrimeti. What's at stake here? And how could it affect trans healthcare across the country?
So this case is huge EE. It's got everyone's attention because it could really set a precedent for the whole nation. Basically, it boils down to whether states can ban gender-affirming care for minors. Even when it's supported by, major medical organizations, the family, the healthcare providers.
So basically, depending on what the court decides, we could see these bans affirmed nationwide.
It's possible. Or it could reaffirm the right to access this essential care. Both sides have really complex arguments.
And what are they?
Well, those who are against these bans, they argue that they violate fundamental rights to privacy, bodily autonomy, equal protection under the law.
Right.
And they point to all that research, the overwhelming scientific consensus that this care is safe and effective.
And on the flip side, what are they saying?
Those who support the bans, they often focus on parental rights and protecting children, saying minors can't make these big medical decisions, that it should be up to the parents.
But the article points out that in most cases, families who are seeking gender-affirming care are doing it with the guidance of medical professionals, and they've got the full support of their kids.
Exactly. These aren't decisions made on a whim. They're often the result of years of, therapy, exploring, and careful consideration.
It's a process.
It is. And to suggest that parents are somehow manipulating their kids or pushing them into this is not only insensitive, it completely disregards all those ethical and medical standards that are already in place.
It's such a complicated issue with valid points on both sides. But we have to remember that at the center of all this are trans youth and their families.
Yes.
These policies directly affect their lives. We need to hear their stories.
Absolutely. And those stories often get lost in the political noise. The article reminds us of that, sharing Dr. McLean's observation. She said, the first visit, kids are always just grinning from ear to ear. They're texting their friends. They're so excited. Then once they start hormone therapy, they feel aligned on the inside. And I have parents say things like, I got my kid back.
It's a good reminder that this isn't about pushing an agenda. It's about helping people live their best lives.
Right. And not just improving mental health either. Gender affirming care can also be good for physical health. Like when trans youth get access to puberty blockers, it can actually prevent the development of certain physical traits that don't align with their gender identity.
Oh, I see. So it can actually reduce the need for more invasive surgeries later on.
Exactly. So there are potential benefits on multiple levels, physical and mental. It's truly a healthcare issue.
Absolutely. And that leads us to another important point about this election: Trump's cabinet picks, particularly those who have a history of being anti-trans. The article mentions a few names: Pete Hegseth for Defense, Marco Rubio at State, and Kristi Noem for Homeland Security.
Yeah, those appointments definitely raise some eyebrows.
I mean, Hegseth's been pretty vocal about his opposition to women serving in combat, and he's made some really transphobic remarks. Then you have Rubio, who tried to get questions about gender identity removed from the census, and Noem, who signed that law banning gender-affirming care in South Dakota.
It's concerning.
It really makes you think about the administration's priorities. When you see people with these kinds of views being put in such powerful positions, it's a little unsettling.
It is. These aren't just symbolic positions. These people have the power to create policies that directly impact the lives of transgender people in America.
It's a sobering thought. You know, we've been talking a lot about the potential negative outcomes of this election, but the article did highlight some positive developments too, like the election of several transgender candidates, including Sarah McBride. She's the first openly trans person elected to Congress.
That's a huge step forward.
It is, and it speaks volumes about the growing visibility and political power of the trans community.
Even when things are tough, they're making their voices heard, demanding that they be represented.
Exactly. And it's not just about electoral politics, right? It's about those everyday acts of resistance and resilience within the community. Like Joan Irwin's statement, we've had to just kind of walk through the fire and come out better on the other side.
That's such a powerful image. It really captures the spirit of the trans community. They're not giving up, they're not backing down. And that's a message everyone needs to hear. Because when you're facing discrimination and oppression, hope and resilience, those are the forces that drive change.
It's amazing to see in the face of so much adversity. But thinking about everything we've talked about today, I can't help but think about the emotional toll this takes on trans individuals and their families. Just having to constantly feel like your rights are being questioned, your identity debated, like your very existence is up for discussion.
Oh, absolutely. That has got to be exhausting.
It's got to weigh heavily on you.
Yeah, and isolating too. To always have to defend who you are, to fight for just basic respect and recognition, it's a lot to carry. It's no surprise that rates of anxiety and depression, even PTSD, are higher within the trans community.
And that's why it's so important to create those safe spaces, those supportive and affirming environments. So if you're listening and you have a trans friend, family member, or colleague, reach out to them,
Yeah.
Just let them know that you're there.
Yeah, just having someone in your corner can make all the difference.
Sometimes the smallest things can mean so much.
Absolutely, like using the right pronouns, respecting their chosen name, just listening without judgment. These might seem like small gestures, but they really send a powerful message.
It's about validation, letting them know you see them. And it's not just about those personal interactions, right? It's about fighting for change on a bigger level.
Yes, exactly.
Challenging those discriminatory policies.
Yeah.
Building a society where everyone feels safe and respected.
Right, because the fight for trans rights, it's part of a much larger fight for social justice.
It is, and it's for equality and equity for all of us.
Absolutely. When we stand up for one marginalized group, we stand up for all marginalized groups. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, right? It's about recognizing that we're all connected, we all deserve a chance to thrive.
And that's so important. So for our listeners out there who might be feeling overwhelmed or discouraged by everything we've discussed today, where can they find hope? Where can they find inspiration?
Just look around. Look at the resilience of the trans community, their commitment to fighting for their rights, their refusal to be silenced. Look at all the allies who are stepping up and speaking out in support of trans equality.
And look how far we've already come.
We have. Even with all the challenges, there's been real progress.
And remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process.
A marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. There will be setbacks, there will be moments of despair, but this fight for justice is always worth it. And you don't have to do it alone.
Right. There are amazing organizations, communities, so many people who are ready to fight alongside you, to support you. Connect with those groups. Find your people. Find strength in those shared experiences.
And never underestimate your own voice. Whether you're speaking out against injustice, supporting trans-led organizations, or even just having open conversations with your friends and family, you have the power to make a difference.
This deep dive has been quite a journey exploring all these complexities of trans health in America.
It has.
But as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. Hope is not passive. It's not something we just sit back and wait for. We have to create it through our actions, our words, our dedication to building a better world.
So thank you all for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope you learned something new, that it sparked some reflection, maybe even inspired you to take action. We're all in this together, and by supporting each other, by keeping that hope alive, we can create a world where every single person can live authentically, safely, and with dignity. Thanks for being here.